If you've watched any of my previous videos, you're always going to hear me talk about relax, let everything come together. Don't be nervous. And it is easy to do. It's harder to convince you that you need to. So let's tear down the reasoning why we do an air brake test. First of all, I think if you understand the reason, you're smart people. You're going to be able to put this together. And it'll help you to remember it as well. Things like the KDA method that I put together, just a way of focus. That's all we're looking for. So why do we do an air brake test? Well, number one, it's the most important part. If I'm driving down the road and I have a steering issue, I can stop and fix it. If I have a suspension issue, I can stop and fix it. If I have a flat tire issue, I can stop and fix it. But if my issue is my brakes, the only thing that's going to stop me is a noun, a person, place, or thing. No good, no good. Even the slight movement of an 80,000-pound vehicle on whether the surface is slightly down or whatever, or up. If I can't stop, I can't stop. All right? We're not in this business to destroy things. We're in there to make money for ourselves, right? To create a better life. Truck driving changed my life and an entire generation. I know it's going to do the same for you. So keep enthusiastic, but calm down on your thought process here. And here's what I'm talking about. We know that if I'm going to test the air brake systems, there's 3 tests that actually come involved in this. I don't want to make it 1. I want to break it down into 3. All right. Nice, easy, digestible pieces and portions. And just take your time on each one. First, we got to start the truck up, right? Motor's running, air from the outside's being taken through the air compressor, tanks are being filled up to a system where it gets up to approximately 125 psi. And I'll tell you how I got that in just a moment. Approximately 125 psi. I know if it goes over that, the safety pop-off valves are going to pop. So it's going to go up to that part, and we're going to know that the governor hit the cutout point when we hear that of air coming out. So that's pretty easy. We're going to let it build up. We're just watching our needles and our gauges, letting the truck run. Gets up to the cutout point. I heard that undistinguishable sound of the governor kicking out. I know I'm full. Because let's face it, it really doesn't make sense to try to find out if a cup is leaking if you keep filling it up, right? So what do I got to do? I got to turn it off. I've got to stop the air from the outside of the motor running, filling up them tanks, right? Because when the air pressure drops, the governor kicks on and says, hey, we're losing air, let's put more air in it. So I want to find out if there's a leak. So what I got to do is I got to stop that motor from filling in the air. So now I'm full. Previous to doing that, I want to make sure that I put the truck into the lowest possible forward gear and turn off the motor. 1, to keep my truck, when I let off the clutch and it stopped, it doesn't roll. Or you can use wheel chocks. Either one's acceptable. We just know that we're going to be releasing brakes to find out if there's a leak in the system. So we don't want the truck to roll away. So we're going to put it in either the first lowest gear or get out and chock the wheels. We're going to turn the vehicle off. That stops the air from building into the tanks. Next, we're going to turn the key to the on, not running position. This is for the second test, but we need to do it now so we don't forget. Okay? So now that we have our conditions set, it's no longer building air because it's full. We're not going to roll away. We're in a gear or chocked wheels. The vehicle is on the on, not running position. All we hear is the lights and all that stuff. Now we're going to push in our knobs, our parking brakes and emergency brakes, right? I guess when you're parking, they're called parking brakes. When you're in an emergency, they pop out. They're called your emergency brakes, but they're the same brakes. So we're going to push both of those knobs in. Just like a lever of your emergency brake in your car, you pull it on to activate it, just like you're pulling those out. You pushed it off to release them, right? So we're going to push them both in. We're in gear, so we're not going to roll away or wheels are chocked, one or the other. We're going to push them both in. There's going to be an escape of air because what is happening is from those tanks, it's delivering it all the way back through the front and the rear of the vehicle. All the little brakes, right? And then we're going to actually push our front brake, our service brake, because the 2 front cans in the front, they are service only. So I want to make sure that all the air from the tanks is through every part of my brake system. And when I hit that, that finally puts them all together, right? We got like 10 brakes or whatever. That is going to take some travel time to release it. So you'll see a slight drop in your air. This is normal. It's completely normal. You're going to see that drop. It's the air moving to where it's got to go. We want to push it into all the brakes and put all the brakes on with our foot pedal, our service valve, right? Now we're going to watch that needle, because I can't always hear, and I can be listening with the window down. I can't always hear an air leak. It can be very slight, but I can watch that needle and I can tell if that needle's dropping. So we know the acceptable amount of air loss is no more than 4 PSI for the combination vehicle, right? 3 PSI for Class B vehicle, right? And this is outside of the permitted area, okay? So the first thing I want to know is I have identified that I have no leakage. Remember this, if the vehicle leaks over that, you didn't fail, the vehicle failed. You're not being tested on whether the vehicle passes or fails. You're being tested on, do you understand the process of how to check it? This should make it easier. So the first test I performed was the leak test. By pushing in all the brakes and activating it and waiting for it to stabilize, I want to look at the gauge. It cannot leak more than 4 PSI for that combination vehicle with a truck and a trailer. I got to go a minute. Got to watch it for 1 minute, 60 seconds. That should give me ample time to know. Okay, minute's up. It did or it didn't. Give them the results. Either the test has passed or the test has failed. Even if it failed, we're going to go to the next 2 tests to find out how much of that test is going to fall and fail. Sorry. So the next part is, let's assume it passed. The next part is, let's see that if I'm driving down the road, I'm not looking at my dash. I'm looking out on the road, right? I need something to warn me to look down at the dash in case I start to lose air. So that's called the second part of the test, the pump down part, right? Don't be an amateur and pump it like rapidly. Take your time, do full foot pedals. You want to see what that truck's going to do. That's your truck. So just fan the brakes down slowly, full pedals, and see where that warning light buzzer is going to activate. We know that it should activate at 60 or higher, right? Some of your books might say 55 or something like that, but rule of thumb, 60 PSI. You'll follow your state identification, but we know that we're looking for 60. You're going to find that most of them are way over that, 70, 80, and that's fine. But the minute that light and that buzzer sounds together, I'm going to stop pumping. I know that something's going to warn me before it gets to the 60 mark, regardless. That tells me that that warning light buzzer works. There's one safety thing that's going to tell me if I'm going to lose air. Now, obviously, after that test is either passed or failed, I'm going to my third and final test. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to continue to fan down that air pressure on those brakes. I want to drop the needle between the 20 and the 40, or the 40 and 20, whatever, in that area on the gauge. What should occur is both of those brakes that were parking brakes that are in the release position should automatically pop out, right? Now they become emergency brakes, right? There's something should automatically trigger it. I don't want it to trigger at 0 and realize I don't have no way of stopping. I need them to pop on. So I want to make sure that that safety mechanism is going to work properly. So again, I start to fan it down. As I'm bringing it down between that 40 and 20 or 20-40, however you want to say it, both of those gauge knobs should pop out automatically without me touching them. Now, if only one pops out and the other one don't come out yet, sometimes they follow right behind each other, but regardless, both of them should be on that full set position before it hits that 20 PSI. That tells me that, number one, I don't have a leak. Number two, that test tells me that if I do develop a leak, something's going to warn me to look down and see it so I can get off the road, right? Safe. And number 3, that if it continues to lose a lot of air, usually within that 20 to 40 PSI, it's going to set the brakes for me, that I'm going to stop. All right. It's very easy to do. And it's very easy, I guess, to not do. If you do anything in this field, check your brakes every time you start that truck, that you're going to move it. Know that they're there. Now, obviously, there's extra things that we can do after we're sure that those are done. For example, we can rebuild the air back up. And we set approximately 125 PSI simply because that's what the state of Pennsylvania says. It's an approximate. So if it's 130, we're still right. If it's 120, we're still right. You see where we're at? Approximately 125 opens that category up for any kind of, detail, because different manufacturers might set their equipment differently. But we know it should be over 120 at least. 125 PSI is where they're looking at. It's a normal setting. So now we've built the air back up. We put it in low gear again, going forward. We want to test our brakes to make sure that the brakes are actually having contact with the drums. We know there's no leaks. We know if there's going to be a leak, something's going to warn me. We know that the automatic brake, the pop outs are going to automatically happen between 20 and 40 if that leak becomes bigger. Now we want to make sure that the brakes are actually in contact with the drums when they should be. So the first thing I normally do is I bring the air back up and I'll release that yellow knob, the tractor brake portion, and I'll leave the red knob out, engaged, to leave the brakes on the trailer. And I'll slightly tug against the trailer just to make sure it doesn't move. If the brakes are properly adjusted, it should not move. Next, I'll reverse that. I'll release the trailer brakes and I'll leave the tractor on and I'll pull against the tractor. The tractor should not move either if the brakes are in proper adjustment. If it moves, something's not adjusted. Get it fixed before you leave. Then finally, I'll release both of them because I want to check the 2 in the front now, the ones that are service brake only. And I'll start moving 3 to 5 mile an hour, push the clutch in so I don't stall the vehicle, and I'll jag kind of hard on my brakes in the front. And I'm going to hold the steering wheel loosely, loose grip. And what I'm looking for is when I hit that brake, does it stop even or does it turn to one side or the other? Because the front brakes can become out of adjustment. If it jerks to this side, it's always the opposite one that's out. If it jerks to this side, that means this one's out. You just need to get your brakes adjusted previous to taking your trip. If you're safe in the beginning, taking that literally maybe 10 or 15 minutes that it does to do a brake test, if that, it gives you an assurance to know that you're going to be safe, that people around you are going to be safe, right? Other things may occur, but the brakes shouldn't be one of them. Make sure you take your time. This is why all these states, the federal guidelines, go into so much emphasis on how do you test your brakes. But it's more than just checking off a list to get through the test. You need to know how to do this every time you get into that vehicle, and you need to make sure you do it. DOT that sits out there and patrols the roads can stop you at any time and tell you to perform an air brake test. You don't want to be embarrassed by not remembering or trying to go through a list, or worse yet, when you're doing it, something fails. Now you're out of service. And it's a safety thing. It's either an 80,000 pound moneymaker or it's an 80,000 pound death machine. Please take your time. Be safe. And again, if you like my channel, please subscribe to it. Talk to your friends. If you have comments, comment to me.